Foster Jenkins.
I gotta remember that. That's a funny
And
story.
she is a card. She's from Scranton, Pennsylvania. Now she was a patron of the arts, but people loved her.
That's really
I
funny.
have to tell you, when I first started doing this show, I could listen to maybe 8 notes, and I'm like, okay, that's enough. And I can listen to her better now. I'm a little more prepared.
I just think it's really comical because I could sing that well.
I can sing that well, you know, and I can't sing.
And could you imagine selling out Carnegie Hall?
Selling out Carnegie Hall
That's
with
funny.
that.
That's pretty funny.
Well, you know, there is that. I think that is hysterical, but
pretty
that's
good.
me.
Florence Foster Jenkins.
Florence Foster
I have to
Jenkins.
remember that.
She did it her way, pretty much.
My way, huh? My way.
Her way, yes.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about Pennsylvanians and their trees? We all know the state's name means Penn's Woods, but that doesn't account for the bizarre things that folks in this neck of the woods do to their spare tree trunks. Now, it seems that when you put Pennsylvanians in front of a tree, their imaginations run wild. Where anybody else would see a birch or a maple or a hemlock, a Pennsylvanian sees a blank slate on which to create a bear, a totem pole, or perhaps a leering winged demon. Now, given the hardy nature of many of Pennsylvania's mountain folks, it's hardly any surprise that every year the little town of Ridgway in the Elk Mountain region hosts an annual chainsaw carving convention. It is attended by power tool wielding folk artists from across the world and celebrates the manly art or womanly art of turning tree trunks into totems and bears. Now, we're not knocking totem poles and bears, but there are plenty of more unusual ways to carve your forestry byproducts. Take, for example, these prime examples of tree trunk chainsaw massacre. By the way, not all of these are massacres. Some of them are pretty beautiful. For example, that one.
Wow.
Or this.
Oh.
How about that?
Wow. Oh,
I really like
look
that.
at that. That's awesome. Oh, yeah. That's really nice.
Or this.
What is that?
That's people on trees. These are rabbits and a totem pole on a tree.
Wow.
And then there's this one.
Oh, look at that.
Okay?
Yeah.
Bang and zoom. As you drive along Middletown Chester Road in Chester County, you hardly notice that this odd rocket is mounted on a tree stump, but it is.
Where is that?
That is on Middletown Chester Road in Chester County.
Chester County.
Chester County,
That
yes.
doesn't even look like that's a tree. The top
Well,
of
there's
it.
the stump.
I see that, but I don't believe that the rest of it looks like a tree, does
The
it?
rest of it does not. There's the stump. There's the rocket. Okay.
Maybe they just sat the rocket on top.
Well, that's possible. Now, is it a tribute to Cold War brinksmanship? Might be. After all, Nike missiles were stacked around Pittsburgh and Philly, so it could be that. Seems the countryside had only folk art like this to save the day. Or how about this one? I love this one, my favorite.
Oh, wow.
Big smile for the camera. Now, how would you like to see this on your way back from Home Depot or Red Lobster?
Yeah.
It's just what shoppers in Delaware County's town of Springfield encounter as they head out from the mall. Now, this spider monkey devil tree stump bares its teeth at contractors and homeowners alike. To take the edge off the menace, there's a smiling half moon affixed to an adjacent tree. But who knows what meaning hides behind that, what meaning behind the image might hold. Now, I want to show you another one. This is not a tree, by the way. Oh, there's that one.
Ah.
This is actually, it's a memorial for a grave. And there's a big cross attached to this tree trunk. And beyond this is a drop. So it's quite possible they put it there as a memorial. And then there are these mushroom things in Radnor. This is Mushroom Henge. which shows you that all that
How did you find these things?
I have my ways. As I told you, my
Did you
husband and
up-
I look
it
for
up
the
in
weird.
On the internet?
Well, sometimes we just drive around and see them.
Huh.
This is Jane Mansfield's grave.
Oh.
And
Where was
finding
that?
a big heart-shaped tombstone in a little boneyard like Fairview Cemetery in Penargil shouldn't be too difficult.
In Pennsylvania?
Just outside of Wyomissing, pretty much. This is,
Seriously?
yes. Except that an inordinate number of graves in this cemetery have heart-shaped markers. You would think finding this one would not be too difficult. After wandering around many graves, checking out false leads, we finally found the final resting place of movie queen Jane Mansfield. Now, like Jane's persona, the marker is large, over
That's
the top.
not it.
That is it.
Yeah,
Oh.
that's her.
Yep.
It's on there.
And it's just a bit tacky. Now, in fact, Jane was too big for just one memorial. This grave is one of 3 places that celebrate the life and untimely death of the buxom blonde who in her day rivaled Marilyn Monroe. Naturally, there's a cenotaph in Hollywood. A cenotaph is a memorial but without a body, usually. And there's a death site marker in Slidell, Louisiana, where Jane's 1966 Buick Electra plowed into a tractor trailer obscured by a fog of insecticide spray. Rumors spread
Yeah, everybody knows that.
that Jane was decapitated and that her head is buried in Hollywood Forever Memorial Park.
Oh boy.
They
Wow.
split
Not
her-
true.
They split her up.
Oh, that's not true.
Not true.
She didn't lose her head?
She lost her
Yeah, she
head,
did,
but
but
it's
they
not
didn't
buried
split her up.
elsewhere. All of Jane, although she died of severe head wounds,
Mhm.
all of Jane lies buried just off South Main Street in Penargil.
Hmm.
It's almost a homecoming, for while she achieved fame as a Tinseltown sex symbol, Jane was born 100 miles or so south of Penargil in, anybody know where? She was born in Bryn Mawr.
Bryn Mawr.
Bryn Mawr, yes,
Really?
yes. Which I thought was really kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Well, you would never expect to find a celebrity like that in a local grave.
Well, you wouldn't expect to find her in Penargil either. I mean, really, Penargil is a little tiny town.
I've never heard of that town.
This is just near Reading, is where it is.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's up near Reading. Now, at first, we thought there was nothing weird about the giant heart at the grave, given that giant hearts are a common motif in this part of the afterworld. Then, we saw the fresh flowers and teddy bears placed there almost 40 years after her death. The groundskeeper at the cemetery stopped his weed whacking and strolled over to us. I could have saved you some wandering if you had asked me where she was, he commented. We get people coming to see her almost every day.
Oh.
Now we felt a little bit awkward about this, as if we might be mistaken for fanatics, you know? And we mumbled something about just passing through. The groundskeeper nodded, clearly skeptical. One fellow was here last week with a huge bouquet of flowers, he said, and added with a note of disbelief in his voice, he left her a card. Yeah. Slowly, he raised his hand and tapped his finger 3 times against his temple. Then he turned away and fired up the weed whacker again. Yet there's something weird about this grave, all right, it's the fans. Believe it or not,
Wow.
yeah.
What were they, her movie posters?
These are her movie posters, yes.
Huh.
This is in Erie, Pennsylvania. It is the 2nd largest smokestack in the world, in the Western Hemisphere. Anyone know where the 1st largest smokestack is? First largest smokestack is in Canada, actually. And the reason, this one is 840 feet tall. And the reason it is so tall is it is a coal smokestack. And with coal, you just can't burn it up and send it out. You need the effluvia that fall through the atmosphere. So it is, as I said, the 2nd largest smokestack in the Western Hemisphere. And it is in Erie, Pennsylvania. Yeah. Now, of all the things a nice historic town in like one in Bucks County could adopt as a cultural icon, the very last one that springs to mind would be a huge concrete building built by a lawyer. And yet, this is exactly what the Mercer Museum is. This 6-story reinforced concrete castle dominates Doylestown Historic District with a haphazard arrangement of arched and square windows with towers and gabled roofs, all made of a material so crude that you can see the impression of the planks and burlap that made the molds into which the concrete slurry had been poured. Yet somehow, the Mercer Museum has a kind of grandeur. And appearances aside, it's amazing to think that this structure is the work of a gifted amateur. Henry Mercer was a successful lawyer without formal training in architecture, but between 1913 and 1916, he designed and built this enormous structure with help from his 8 laborers and a horse named Lucy. Mercer and his team worked 6 days a week to complete the job. Now it's become so revered that it appears as a line drawing on the town's street signs and houses in Bucks County's Historical Society, in Bucks County's Historical District. Now, as odd as the outside of this building is, nothing compares to the puzzling contents of its museum, which is also the brainchild of the busy Henry Mercer. At the turn of the 20th century, he noticed that industrialization was wiping out trades that had once been part of every town and village along with their tools. The small looms that once made rough cloth for everyday use were no longer needed. The wares of local blacksmiths, who at one time had created tools for farmers and fishermen, were being passed over. Except for the Amish models, horse-drawn coaches were disappearing too. Even the wooden statues outside cigar stores were vanishing. Part of America's past was slipping away, and to Mercer, this meant 2 things. It would be relatively easy and cheap to buy up these artifacts, and it was essential to preserve them. And that's what he did in the concrete castle. Walking into the Mercer Museum is an odd experience. There's a huge hall, 6 stories high, rimmed with galleries and sealed rooms crammed with tools of various trades. Hanging from the rafters, actually there are no rafters, it's more like hanging from the concrete, are boats, carriages, bicycles, saws, grist mills, and baskets of all shapes and sizes. Grotesque cigar store statues leer at you as you turn corners. So, off the winding corridors down the main hall are rooms containing countless decorative tiles and iron fragments. And then, these gorgeous tiles, truly. They've actually built an addition onto this. You don't always walk into this anymore, which is kind of good. This is the original key to the front door.
Wow.
And this is the gallows. They bring children here. This is their gun room. More guns. And then we get this. Anybody know what this is? This is a vampire killing kit. You won't have to look hard to find weird images here. The fire guards show devils steering families into arguments and skeletons beating people. There is even this Victorian vampire killing kit featuring, among other things, a handgun with silver bullets, a combination stake and crucifix, and vials for holy water. Upstairs, in a mezzanine above the 6th floor, is a gallows with an open trapdoor, as well as a noose, handcuffs, and cudgels behind glass. And this is the place they take kids on school trips. The Mercer Museum ranks high on the charts of weird places that have been assimilated into the community. But even though Doylestown does embrace Mercer's concrete castle, there's no denying it is a strange place.
Wow. That's funny.
Isn't that funny?
Mm-hmm.
All right, one of my favorites. Every day in the town of Jim Thorpe in Carbon County, a hanged man proclaims his innocence in the only way a dead man can. Since 1877, his hand has been raised in protest in the last home he ever had, the Carbon County Jail Cell number 17. This permanent marker on the cell wall has resisted cleaning, repainting, and even replastering. A couple of days after every attempt to cover it up, the handprint comes back, and the story of persecution by evil mine owners comes back with it.
Wow.
The coal barons of the late 1800s were an unscrupulous band of money grubbers who kept the mostly Irish and Welsh workforce squashed firmly under their thumbs. As the miners chipped away at the anthracite deposits in the Pennsylvania mountainside, they earned only pennies, and coal barons sucked the cost of their supplies out of that meager pittance. That song, 16 tons, what do you get? I owe another day older and deeper in debt. What is it, St. Peter, don't you take me because I can't go? I owe my soul to the company's store. That's exactly where it comes from. Anyway, it was a social situation that often leads to revolution, and the revolutionaries in this scene were the Molly Maguires. Now, the secret society committed acts of sabotage, and according to the coal barons, murder, something the management knew plenty about, since they stooped to it themselves if their profits were threatened. Of course, the plutocrats had money, power, and therefore the law on their side, which made it all the more easier to dispose of troublemakers. During one of the Molly Maguire trials, the inhabitants of cell 17 vehemently proclaimed his innocence, but he was sentenced to death anyway. On hanging day, before he was taken from his cell, he slapped his hand, dirty from the cell floor, on the wall and exclaimed, "This is the hand of an innocent man." In those days, innocence was no defense, so he died that day. But his handprint remained and came back even after it was scrubbed off. Over the next century, the cell was cleaned, repainted, replastered, and always the hand reappeared in a day or so. It's still there to this day and on exhibit at the old jail museum housed in the old Carbon County Courthouse. Now, tours are offered daily, where you can see not only the handprint, but also the National Enquirer article telling the story of it. Now, as museum displays go, the article is a pretty sensational read. But then again, the story is pretty sensational too. As if that were not enough, a man was accused of murdering his brother, and despite his claims of innocence, he was subsequently convicted and sentenced to life in prison. The man swore revenge. He was sent to state prison, and no one thought much of his threat until one night when the man hung himself in his cell.
Oh.
His suicide note said that he was going to haunt the Carbon County Jail, where he was held during his trial, forever, to protest his unjust verdict. He would scratch his name, Niehoff, on the floor outside of cell 2 to remind everyone of the injustice. According to local lore, the name appears and is still there. Inmates and guards claim that every year, on the anniversary of his suicide, his spirit could be heard scratching on the floor of the cell, cell number 2. Now, there are some other strange reports, like from the jail library. It's said that visitors feel like they're walking uphill in this small room. The dungeon in the jail basement is generally off limits to tour groups, but it's said that if you try to enter, you'll experience a feeling of dread so powerful that it stops many people dead in their tracks. That's where the prisoners are kept in isolation, and apparently they still don't want to be bothered. Now, I got to tell you, we took the tour through the dungeon, and I didn't feel any of this stuff. Now, maybe I'm not sensitive to ghosts, but these are all interesting stories. That's probably about it. At least that's the way I feel
Was that
about
all
it.
the same, was all the same building?
All the same building, different people. Let me show you the clip. We can come back to what I have to say about it.
And that's in where? What town?
This is in Jim Thorpe.
In Jim Thorpe.
Yes. This is a creepy video, by the way. We have pictures. They do not come close to this video. By the way, a few tourists have even reported seeing 4 bodies swing from the gallows inside the prison. Spirit reenactments of the restless Molly Maguires, unable to find peace after all these years.
That long jungle jail.
Generally, my husband takes pictures. His pictures don't come close to the creepiness of this video. He seems to have missed it in this particular instance.
Another point just came up. Jim Thorpe is also known as Marchand.
Marchand, that's exactly right. I could have called it lechon, but I didn't know whether you people would have known it or not. This is where they took the food in.
She's the music.
You just can't parole some jailbirds. They stay in stir forever.
Oh, look at them, the galaxies.
Yay. This is the story of the handprint on the wall that I told you. And there's the handprint. And it keeps coming back.
Does it look like a hand?
Looks exactly like a hand. They've had forensics done on it, and the forensic pathologists say nothing is there.
When did that building go out of use, do you know?
Not very long ago.
Oh, really?
1960s maybe?
Oh, they used it up until then.
Yes. As a matter of fact, when we were up there, they were telling us about a man who still lives in the town who was imprisoned here.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
So he served his time.
And then they
he
just
was,
decided what, to turn it into a museum?
yeah, once that hand kept coming back, they decided
It would
museum.
be a good
Good museum.
tourist attraction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Huh, not what I had expected. All right. This is truly not what I had expected.
Okay.
This is Roadside America in
Oh, we've been there.
Charlottesville.
We've been there.
Now, this is not particularly weird,
That-
but when you think it is, when you think about it, yeah, it's kind of weird in a way.
It's weird because it doesn't change ever.
It doesn't change ever.
Ever.
It is a full-scale model. It does its thing. It does its thing. It's very unique.
Isn't that the place where the Star Spangled Banner comes on at the end or
Yeah.
something? And
Yeah.
The what?
America the Beautiful
America
they
the
play.
Beautiful comes on at the end. Do you remember that?
Yep.
That